Chapter 2 Motherless. The tragic and unexpected death of his wife brought Sante Presenti face to face with a host of new problems. Consider his difficult situation. His position as assessor to the pontifical delegation was no sinecure. Legal duties kept him busy practically every morning at court, and the rest of the day was spent in his office. Clients had to be interviewed, legal precedents consulted, compromises worked out, decisions given. The work seemed to have no end. At home, he had a house full of 9 lovely children, ranging from Lawrence, who was 16, down to Vincent, who was barely 3 years old. Mary Louise, who, as so often in such cases, became the little mother to her younger brothers and sisters, was only 13, too young to be given any responsibility. His solution, as befitted a good lawyer, was both simple and practical. He installed a mature and trustworthy woman as housekeeper to supervise his domestic arrangements and to look after the children. Fortunately, he found a treasure, and the arrangement worked well. Pacifica, as she was called, was efficient and pious, reliable and hardworking. Best of all, she really loved the children, and they returned her affection. She had her own methods of maintaining discipline and could be strict without ceasing to be kind. Her most effective weapon was a daily report of any misdemeanors when their father returned home in the evening. Owing no doubt to the absence of his mother's restraining care, Francis soon developed into a somewhat willful boy. Naturally, quick and vivacious, he was prone to anger, and if thwarted in any way or even mildly reprimanded by his father, he would fly into a tantrum. These childish fits of temper were no half-hearted affairs, for Francis never did anything by half measures. His face grew fiery, and he trembled with the violence of all his feelings. Then he would raise his voice and stamp his foot until the united opposition of his brothers and sisters or the stern word of his father called him sharply to order. As often as not the scene would end with Francis flinging himself furiously out of the room and staying in seclusion until the storm had spent itself. The tempest was usually over as quickly as it had arisen. It is also true that Francis harbored no ill will and displayed no sulliness afterwards. Once his anger had calmed down, his repentance was genuine enough. Again and again, with downcast head and tearful eyes, Francis timidly came to his father to say he was sorry, to promise that it would not happen again. To break him of his bad habits, the father sometimes ignored him and pretended to be deaf to his plea for forgiveness. Then the little fellow would jump on his knee, throw his arms around his neck, and see a quick and easy pardon. But Sante Presenti was too good a lawyer to be taken in by such tricks. "No, Francis," he used to say. "No, not embraces, but action." It seems clear that his father was worried about Francis. He had noted the warning signs and feared that if the boy were allowed to go on as he was doing, the results would be serious. Pacifica received strict instructions to pay particular attention to him and to stand no nonsense. As he grew older, he did succeed in curbing this childish petulance. The frequent admonitions of Pacifica, patiently repeated over and over again, at length began to bear fruit. "If I had listened to her advice," he wrote candidly long afterwards, "I would have been a better boy." No doubt, too, the healthy discipline of his brothers and his sisters contributed not a little to his improvement. On the whole, he was both the terror and the pet of the household. His sister Teresa added with sisterly candor, "Even then he had a bright and lively disposition, and on that account the housekeeper never treated him with the same severity that she showed towards me and the rest of the family." Sante Presenti soon saw that the growing boys needed more attention than Pacifica could give. Besides, the younger ones had to be prepared for school, and some elementary lessons seemed desirable. Again, he was fortunate in his choice. He found a young cleric, Philip Fabi, who was quite willing to act as tutor to the boys and give general supervision. So the lessons began, given sometimes at the Presenti home, sometimes in Fabi's house. The young man also accompanied them on their walks, and took them to visit the many churches of Spoleto, especially the cathedral with its historic shrine of Our Lady. This arrangement lasted for about 2 years, until it was time for Francis to start school. With Fabi, he seemed to have tried a repetition of the familiar scenes and did not at first take kindly to restraint and discipline. He was of an eager, headstrong character, recalls Fabi, adding rather grimly, but this impetuousness did not last very long, and he quickly became manageable again. Evidently, Philip Fabi had his own quietly efficient method of restoring order. Francis was grateful to his first teacher, and in later years kept up friendship with him. One curious little incident has escaped oblivion. Shortly before he left home to enter the Passionist, Francis recalled that he owed Fabi a small debt. To raise the necessary cash, He collected some of his surplus books, disposed of them to a second-hand bookseller, and with the proceeds was able to settle his account. Fabi was obviously impressed, for the fact remained vividly in his memory to be recalled many years afterwards. At home, Sante Pacente did his best to supply that good example that a mother could more easily have given. He was a rather austere Christian, but he tried not to make exacting demands on the children. His own example was a daily lesson. Every morning he rose early and spent an hour in prayer and private devotion before leaving his room. During this time, no one was permitted on any account to interrupt him. Then followed the visit to the neighboring church to hear Mass, accompanied, if possible, by some of the children. After that, he did not see them again until he returned from the office in the evening. Probably, a lifetime spent in the study and administration of the law had had its effect upon his character. Of profoundly religious disposition himself, he regarded his calling as a real vocation. The great English legal maxim, in quotes, that justice should not only be done, but should be manifestly seen to have been done, end quote, was one that would have appealed to his pragmatic mind. Whilst his professional competence ensured respect for his decisions, his inflexible integrity was acknowledged alike by friends and foes as a guarantee of an even-handed justice. A lasting impression was left upon the whole family by an incident which occurred at home. They had all sat down to dinner one day, most probably on a Friday, when a surprise dish came to table, an unexpectedly large, fine fish. The children eyed it expectantly, while Sante Pacente asked quite casually whence it had come. When Pacifica replied that it was a gift and mentioned the name of the generous donor, the father's face grew stern. In quotes, "Didn't you know that he has a case coming up before the court?" he indignantly exclaimed. Then, pointing to the inoffensive fish, he directed, "Take it away at once and give it to the poor. No one in this house is to touch it." Thereupon, the main course vanished speedily from the table, followed by the longing eyes of Francis and his brothers, who found it hard to understand how the ends of justice could best be served by the disappearance of their dinner. In the evening, Sante Pacente liked to stay at home with his family. No matter how tired he might be after an exhausting day at the office, he always had time for the children. One by one they came to him to tell him in detail all that had happened during the day, and he felt his heart grow young again as he listened to their artless chatter. Only when the family rosary had been said, only when they had in turn kissed him good night and gone to bed, only then, when the house fell silent, did he feel the loneliness in his heart and mourn again the loss of his beloved wife. He took his duties as a father, as he took everything else, with a sense of duty and dedication. Gathered around the fireside on a winter's evening, the children listened dutifully as he tried to pass on to them the fruits of his varied experience and prepare them for the battle of life. He warned them repeatedly against the dangers of bad company. Bad companions, he often said, are corrupters of the young. They are Satan's servants, hidden traitors. We must be ever on our guard against them. Sometimes he spoke to them as wisdom speaks in the scriptures, reminding them that all is vanity and vexation of the spirit, and nothing is lasting under the sun, that the soul is of priceless value, and that only the eternal happiness of heaven can appease its endless yearning. As might be expected in the course of time, most of the Pacente boys grew to resemble their father in character and disposition. The only one who did not conform to the general pattern was Francis, who developed into the biggest individualist of them all. Ever light-hearted, he was perpetually bubbling over with mischief, telling jokes that made everybody laugh, or with vigorous gestures imitating some scene he had witnessed during the day. In quotes, "When he left us to join the Passionists," said his brother Michael sadly, "all the sunshine and happiness of our home seemed to go with him." For all that there were times when Francis sorely missed his mother. He was just barely old enough to remember her death, but he knew what it was to be motherless. He lacked the love of someone whom every other boy seemed to have, and that strange sense of someone missing from his life seems to have been ever just below the surface of his affectionate little heart. Mary Louise was the one who noticed this most of all, and in her own gentle understanding way, she did her best to comfort a lonely little boy. She sensed his aching need for love and sympathy, and she was ever ready to receive his confidence and to advise him. Thus a special bond united them, which grew stronger as the years passed by. Despite their father's anxious eye, despite Pacifica's ceaseless care, things happened that would not have occurred had a mother been there to look after them. One unforgettable storm broke over their heads after an incident, amusing in retrospect, but serious enough at the time. Usually, Sante Pacente took the boys with him for an evening walk, but on this occasion, detained by a business appointment, he told Michael to take charge. Poor Michael, not knowing how to control his lively brother, decided that a visit to a friendly neighbor's house would safely pass the time. When they called, the hospitable host, Italian fashion, produced wine in honor of the occasion and offered it to the visitors. Feeling it would be churlish to refuse, they all accepted, including Francis. On their way home, they found that the unaccustomed wine had gone to their heads. Hoping the effect would wear off, they delayed their return as long as they dared, and eventually reached home, late and shamefaced, to tremble before their father's anger. Michael bore the brunt of the blame for this episode. He was in charge of the party, and he should have taken more care, his father said. It was some time before this was forgotten. In his own bedroom, Francis had a small plaster statue of Our Lady of Sorrows, clasping the dead body of her son upon her knees. This was the center of his private devotions. Fresh flowers had always to be placed before it, and the little votive lamp had to be kept alight. How big a place it filled in his heart appears from the injunction he gave to the faithful Pacifica just before he left to join the Passionists. In quotes, "Don't ever let the lamp go out, Pacifica," he begged, "and don't forget to keep fresh flowers always before her." Besides his love for his Heavenly Mother, Francis dearly loved the poor. For a small boy, he had a most generous, lovable nature. There was nothing mean or selfish about him. Like all children, he was fond of sweets and cakes, yet he was never known to hoard them for himself or to take more than his share. Everything had to be equally divided, share and share alike. To his brother Michael, hero of his boyhood, he impetuously gave a gold watch presented to him by a relative for his own birthday. Pacifica greatly admired a length of velvet ribbon which Francis wore around his hat to add to his finery. In quotes, "It would make a lovely sash," she said. At once he slipped it off and handed it to her with a shy little smile. "Take it for yourself," he said, "and wear it around your waist." But always he gave to the poor. On his way to school, Francis thought nothing of giving away half of his lunch, or even the whole of it, to some poor lad he chanced to meet on the road. In quotes, "And one September morning," Michael remembered, "we met a poor old man, and Francis insisted on giving him the 2 or 3 coppers he had with him, which made up all his worldly wealth. Later it was to be a source of scruple that he had perhaps given away too much, and some of it without parental permission. Or again, he was afraid that he had been too lavish, and had even appropriated the family belongings for the poor. His excuse always was that he was doing what his father had told him to do. Once, when Pacifica remonstrated with him, he patiently explained, "But Father told us to be good to the poor. We should never despise the poor, because we don't know what may happen to ourselves some day." It was not, of course, a prophecy, but the words had a strange sequel. In the very last letter he wrote to his father before he died, he spoke again of kindness and generosity to the poor. He concluded in touching words, in quotes, "Remember, Father dear, that you have a son who will never be other than a poor man to the end of his life, one who lives indeed on alms, but one who wants for nothing, and who has, if you will allow me to say so, even more than he had at home. Justice therefore requires that you give to the sons of Jesus Christ what Jesus Christ has given to your Son." End quote. From his father, Francis had inherited a fine sense of justice, which was a marked characteristic even of his boyhood. He could not bear to see any unfair dealing, and was loud in his protest if he thought he perceived favoritism. On the other hand, should his brothers be blamed for any minor peccadillo, Francis tried to make excuses for them. If he couldn't manufacture an excuse, then he begged his father to forgive them. The rest of the family all knew that Sante Pacenti had a soft spot in the heart for Francis, and could seldom hold out for long against his blandishments. Here, then, was the family circle which surrounded young Francis Pacenti, the background against which he grew up. All in all, the household was typical of its time and place. The boys were perhaps inclined to be rather wild and headstrong, but were all exact and regular in their religious duties. It was a family above the average perhaps in piety, but in the main light-hearted and happy. All were united by a deep and lasting affection, a strong sense of unity, and in the center of it was Francis, the most beloved of the family circle, laughing and joking his way through life. Like Quicksilver, one said. Like a will-o'-the-wisp, said another. The point is of some importance, as it helps to evaluate the sacrifice made by Francis in later years, when the call of a greater love proved stronger than the bonds of natural affection. But that sacrifice lay far ahead in the future, unguessed at by the mischievous, carefree little boy in whom it was hard to discern the raw material of future sanctity.